What appears to be a lowercase letter a with over markings on the left edge at the base, perhaps the completion of the circle, which was left open but then corrected. The letter lying slightly below the edge of the lower border, perhaps suggesting a confusion of whether the aleph, the alpha, has a tail and whether it is turned correctly or whether the tail lies above or below the boundary at the lower border. And next to what appears to be the lowercase a, with a slight separation suggesting a new word, beginning with a D perhaps. Once again, over-articulated and inscribed at the top, slightly below the lower edge of the border, but not significantly enough to designate confusion. And then another letter which appears marked over as if correcting an error, perhaps begun as an O, suggesting perhaps the indefinite article a, and then a word beginning with B-O, boy perhaps. And the tail, drawn on this letter, clearly represented below the edge of the line, and if an O, suggesting perhaps a combination with another letter that actually does have a tail, a Y, reinforcing the idea of boy in our interpretation, but that's merely speculative. This particular letter, having been overdrawn and almost turned into a kind of figure that resembles perhaps a face or some sort of faciality, though not clearly so, a heart or a piece of fruit. What appears to be an O again and then a slash next to it. In deciphering this marking, it's difficult to determine whether this is one letter or two. If one, potentially an A again, this time with the indeterminate tail separated from the rest of the letter, or a Q perhaps, that doesn't quite make it. The separation of the slash designating the circular figure of the Q as Q and not O, severed from the circularity of the letter. If two letters, perhaps an O and a Y or J, again suggesting an attempt to perhaps fill in what was marked over after the B, a boy, or box, if this designation as two letters is correct, but the final slash marking the X, you failed to arrive. A box, and then what appears to be an H or chair, and again an A. If each of these are A's, what's interesting is that their formation is different in each instance. This one, drawn with a curve. This one, the curve not quite reaching the design of the remainder of the letter. This one, almost having resolved the problem, perhaps in a certain way. The letter is closed here, apparently, like on the initial movement of the design, unlike in this initial letter in which the opening was closed later. And the question of whether there was a tail that should be treated below the lower border has been resolved in this instance of the A, almost as if whatever were being written as a design for thought or a design for sentence was replaced with a practice and struggle to determine how to go about forming this particular lowercase letter a. And here in the second design, there's an attempt to close a circle and resolve the problem of the tail, but that's not resolved quite adequately, and then a problem arises with the separation. And here we see a kind of resolution, and particularly a resolution that whatever it is that this tail constitutes for the letter A, it does not reside below the lower border. A new letter problem arises with the E, whose tail again is drawn below the lower border, and an L, or something like an L or a J, that appears like a tail, and because of its appearance as tail perhaps, begins almost in the center and proceeds through the lower border as a tail would. At which point the boundaries of these line markings are ignored, and an A is reproduced again. The interesting thing about this one, though, is that the boundary at the bottom is now respected, and the upper border is violated, as if the ground or the achievement made in determining the place of the tail of the A were of such importance that it would be specified here, as opposed to all of the other letters which fail, to abide the restrictions of these line designations. But this single restriction is recognized here, and then there's problem with closure again of the A if this is an A, and the problem in the closure is interesting in this instance, because unlike this initial closure that's made as a kind of scribble or scratch, this one almost seems to designate a kind of knot in the loop, and with a remainder of string perhaps, hanging down, the representation of a tying off. And the tying off, perhaps symbolic or metaphorical of the work that's being done in determining how this letter is formed and where it's to be situated on the page in relationship to these boundary lines and spaces that mark the placement of letters on this horizontal plane or horizontal lineation. The E, not of much concern in terms of placement, but this E perhaps more clearly articulated than the initial E, the L now running off the page. And the next line, difficult to determine, again, what this word is, per letter is. Perhaps an M, in which the final segment isn't quite vertical. An image that looks almost like what could have been drawn as a heart, but with a broken line, as if a piece of yarn or a pipe cleaner, perhaps, bent open. I want to say that this is an M, but again, it's difficult to say, and the context is difficult to derive because the next letter is not at all clear. It seems to begin as if an O, but then it has an ending that gives it the appearance of a transformation from O to E, but then this strange Y that intrudes upon it. So it could in fact be two letters, M-O-Y or M-E-Y. This word could then be me, and then I don't know yet what the Y might signify. If it is in fact a Y, and if it doesn't belong to this letter below as an H, but that signification of the letter below as an H makes sense in terms of what seems to be before it an I and an N, as in the preposition in, and then the word the, in the, forming perhaps the most clearly articulated phrase in the entire configuration of these units, designating what appears to be an attempt to fashion a sentence, a single complete sentence, with this reading that I'm providing as sort of a provisional alternative, right, to the fashioning of a sentence. It's also simultaneously practicing, right, the articulation of placements and formations of certain letters. In that sense, there's a kind of metagraphia going on, a writing about the process and difficulties of writing. If in fact a sentence is being written in which the act of writing letters is being performed, right, and resolved to some extent, but with each resolution a new problem arising, and yet, simultaneously marking solution sets symbolically and conceptually, as in this tying off of knots, right? There definitely is a kind of meta-narratological graphia at work. And in fact, the word meta plays itself out here, although there's an F between the T and the A. But if we take this as an E, met, F-A, the F-A perhaps wanting to be for, and I still, going back to the letter A, want to say that there's an articulation of some kind of indefinite article noun, something, boy or box, and then whatever this might be, if that's an H, held, perhaps, or has, but clearly this is EL and not an S. So whatever this verb might be, if it is in fact a verb, and if this is in fact a boy or a box, remains indeterminate, at least in my interpretation. And then the AEL, perhaps again a correction of this word with the H. And so if we get rid of the H and regard that as a correction, B, a B or H, AL, A, ha, L, A, maybe the B is incorrect and the H is a replacement for it. Or maybe the H is a mistake and it was intended as a reiteration of the B. But still, the AEL remains something of a mystery. Elm, if the word is broken, perhaps, at the line, terminal edge here on the right, elm, but elm doesn't take us too far with the O or T here, and what is a very clearly articulated F, and then the perhaps the most perfect, if you can use that word, perhaps the most I want to use the Greek word teleiosis or completion, right? The most completely fashioned and formally articulated example of the lowercase a that we've seen thus far. In whatever the sentence might be, in terms of this meta-narratology of graphia or metagraphia narrative, like we see a kind of triumph right here, or success right after the F, which seems to come out of nowhere unless there's a reading that I'm not clearly seeing. But the A, quite well designed in this instance. And then this word that seems to represent, I want to say play, seems to be a uppercase or just merely misplaced P. I want to designate this next letter as L, and then unfortunately the A isn't quite as well formed as it was in this instance, but it's it's put into a word, and that again is a different level of success in this meta-narratological struggle to form these graphemes, if we can use that word, because this could be a T and it could be an F again, but the clear articulation of the uppercase letter F here suggests that this isn't an example of an F, but perhaps an example of, as I wanted to make it, a Y to complete the word play. But it could be an X or a T, and it could designate the word plate, or if it were an X, I suppose, and this were something else, it could represent a different word, blocks, perhaps, if this is a B, but I somehow doubt that this is a B. and blocks in, if it were blocks in the, I think, I really don't have much doubt that this is a phrase that represents in the, and then we have this odd what could be P or L or P or I, but I'm interpreting this as belonging to this word below it, and the initial formation of the word, which seems to be KOGD, was replaced with, and then I'm taking these little stick-like lines as being as telling us where we need to go to find the corrected solution, which is OL. I want this word to be cold, and that may be wrong. If the spacing is wrong, and the K doesn't belong to this word, K, whatever it might be, OLD, it could easily belong to perhaps this word, which doesn't seem to recognize, which I don't seem to recognize as a word. And see, here's another reason why I think that that this can't be a B, because this B is pretty articulately formed as a B, as is this one, with a certain amount of correction at the top. But the problem seems to be with the tail at the top, not knowing how to articulate that, not knowing which direction the B goes in. Although I'm not certain what to do with this curve, whether it's an I, and this is an attempt to write big. Now, it is big compared to the other letters, and that might be either an unconscious or subconscious, designation in size to represent the idea of being big, and then the tail, again, perhaps going the wrong way. But the success of making an A draws me away from that reading that this could possibly be a G, because the struggle from this letter A to this letter A to this letter A to this to the teleiosis of this letter A, and then even in these there's clearly a progress from the initial attempt. I hesitate to say that there would be a confusion at that point with the formation of the letter G here, right? And so we seem to have BLA, which would make the K understandable in terms of a single word, black, here. But then what do you do with this? Then you have OLD, which I guess could be old, or maybe I'm misreading what's going on here, and the O and the L or I belongs to this line in the and maybe this isn't an O, maybe this is a P, and I'm misreading the correction here, and this could be in the and maybe it's not the noun black, maybe, or the adjective black, maybe it's like a gerund, like black or something, I don't know. But beginning again as a formation of a sentence, boy or box, perhaps, and then we would need some kind of verb, which I'm not quite finding, unless all of this is an attempt to write the first noun, and then the verb is, perhaps met. And this, could be, I suppose, for, the preposition, and for play, I'm again, a guess. This is really, again, the only unit that completely resolves itself in my interpretation, into readability in the And then we have a problem, OLVA, and perhaps a G or a Y, U maybe, U, and maybe a mistake here, could be the L, maybe superfluous, unclear, like back, have you back, I don't know, OVA, difficult to say. Again, if this is an A little bit of trouble again emerging, but again, if this is the final A, a pretty well resolved, successful articulation of the lowercase alpha letter, a problem perhaps like placing it, in proper size relationship with the rest of the text, but maybe the size representing the triumph itself. So maybe in our search for words and letters, that we're beginning with a kind of error, that the articulation of the relationship to words is unstable and fluid, and it's more clearly defined in this unit in but it's less defined elsewhere, and the real operation of the sentence is to pass through this articulation of these various explorations of the designation of the lowercase letter a, who almost as a character passes through, right, these various formations and emerges as larger and more complete and more final at the very end here. And then if that's the case, and this A is this sort of can we say anagnoresis, or a moment of success and triumph in a certain sense, or as I've been using the word, teleiasis, completion, then what follows must be, a kind of punctuation or afterword, and is perhaps designating a direction for future. And it's interesting because in the direction for future, there's once again a kind of imbalance or confusion, right? But an understanding of the failure of the design, right? And perhaps a motivation to resolve the indeterminacies in this designation here, which both, right, represents error and correction, but also like has a relationship to placement, in the way that like the suggestion of correction is designated above what appears to be the corrected design of the letters. And I may be entirely wrong about that. There may be something else going on, but I think finally at least we can say this about this sentence, that that there is at least as much going on that we can designate as performativity and a kind of meta-narratological learning, graphia of learning, as there is in the representation of some displaced content